Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And of course, welcome back to you too, mate. How are you? How's your week been?
Good, buddy. How are you? We're not talking footy this week because...
Oh, it's a big weekend, mate. It's a big weekend.
Oh, no, this weekend Cummings is a big weekend, but we're not talking about last weekend's results.
No, both of us will pass on that. But no, we're playing each other this week. So what are we going to do? What's bragging rights?
No, I think we've knocked you over a few times when we've gone west.
Oh, you still live in the past, are you? Okay. All right.
Well, yeah, I try to live in the past. When we win, I live in the past. When we lose, I move on, like you saw from the weekend. I suspect you guys should get the job done.
Oh, no, don't play that psychology game on me. But we'll talk about this next week, see how we go. But another big event this weekend, Ben. I don't know if you've noticed, because they're a little bit skinny on ads and awareness at the minute, but there is an election. Did you know that?
I know there's a lot of these yellow ads around the joint, which completely are crazy, and we should all just ignore them. But other than that,
I can't be political, mate.
I can. He's a nutter. Keep away from him. That's it. I mean, you can play.
Because the other two parties are smashing it out the park, aren't they? So let's call it an even playing field. But we've got an election this week, Ben. So a noticeable ramp up in ad activity on the radio, back-to-back ads, same ad, only one ad apart. So it's good to see that lots of money is being spent through advertising channels, Ben. So advertisers must be loving this time.
Oh, they would be loving all of the money that's flowing in their coffers. Absolutely. So it's the biggest game in town, mate. You if you're the political party at the federal level, you get to set the agenda. So make no mistake, it's all about power and influence for these people. So that's what they're after.
They love power, so they get an opportunity to get some power. So folks, so your turn to decide. So my life hack's got something to do with elections today, Ben. But what's property news? Let's give a little.
Teaser. I've just got a little important update on interest rate forecast. So I think it's important. So let's wait until the end for my what's making property news. I've got a little bit of intel from what would be I would have thought a reasonably reliable source, but I'll prosecute that case later in the show. But we're talking all things property and all things sort of policies around getting people into the property market, Bryce.
So what we did, Ben, is we put a little shout out over our socials on the Facebook, and remember it was the Facebook, but and so pretty much asked what are your questions regarding the proposed policies from both sides of politics. So we're going to dive into them today. We're going to talk about them, see what they are, how they qualify, and then stick around, folks, because once we've done that, we're going to go straight into your questions that you've asked us live. No, it's not true. It's not live, but it's very recent.
Yep. This week,
which were the questions that that are playing on your mind as to how these policies will impact you. So before we get into that, Ben, my Mindset Minute theme today, it's largely around a conversation I had with my eldest son, Jack, and how he interacts with his youngest son, my youngest son, Samuel. So here's the quote first. It's author Cheryl Strayed on the trap of self-pity. Nobody's going to do your life for you. You have to do it for yourself, whether you're rich or poor, out of money or raking it in, the beneficiary of ridiculous fortune or terrible injustice. And you have to do it no matter what is true, no matter what is hard, no matter what is unjust, sad, sucky things befall you. Self-pity is a dead-end road. You make the choice to drive down it. It's up to you to decide to stay parked there or to turn around and drive out. So this came across my radar, Ben, because I was having a chat with Jack, because his younger brother is ready, fire, aim, right? He does first, think second, where Jack's a thinker, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's grinding his gears of late because they're on the trampoline, I'm kicking the footy to them, and he gets frustrated with the way that Samuel moves, and he's aggressive, and Sam just hunts the ball when we're kicking the footy on the weekend. He never enters his mind to share it around. It's just get it as much as I can, right?
Yeah.
I had to pull him aside and say, mate, you got to go and hunt it. You got to go and find your own footy. You got to go and position. Samuel's not going to move for you, so you've got to make things happen. So I saw this quote around self-pity, and I think that I teach the boys, wherever your mind goes, your body follows. So if your mind is around, well, someone's going to come along and make it fair for you to get as many kicks and as many marks as your brother, mate, you're going to be in for a rude shock. So
it's a really good point, Bryce, and that is that you make your own luck and you make your own destiny, right? So yeah, those people who think others are going to do it for them, unfortunately in for some roughier roads.
Yeah, one of the techniques
roughier roads,
each their own. One of the other techniques during the week is playing basketball, and so I had to put it into his, because I told him to hunt his own ball, and I had to put it into the terms of Roblox, so the little emeralds, and I had to tell him to imagine that the ball was the emerald, and you had to get as many as you can, and incidentally, it actually wored. And he played.
Well, that's good. That's good.
He played the best game he's ever done. So speak their language, right? So, all right, let's hook in, Ben.
Yes.
Election property policies.
Yeah.
Both sides have outlined what their policies are. Last Sunday, I guess there was a little surprise from
the big pitch. Yeah.
Yeah, the pitch party from the Liberal Party, from the super home buyer scheme. And one of the recommendations for affordability was that you could use super as collateral. They've gone one step further and said you can get access to it. So let's unpack what the super home buyer scheme is that the Liberal Party has proposed. We're also going to go through what the Labor Party's proposed to. And then, as I said before, we're going to go through your questions. So, Ben, first home buyers can get up to 40% of their super, up to a maximum of $50,000. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, so it's obviously an interesting scheme, and for a property investment podcast and property wealth creation, money management type podcast, we also want to set the record straight to our community. We absolutely want every Australian to own a home. Like, it is, not everyone is going to be renting all their life, and we want to see any type of policy that helps people get home ownership is actually phenomenal on so many levels, both social and economic. Owning your biggest investment being your home is fundamental in terms of how much you contribute into society, how much money you're going to have in the future, and then how much of a burden you might be on society in terms of all of the extra things that you may need. So we cannot be any clearer in terms of what we're saying around people being able to afford to get into a home. So all of these instruments and tools are going to be important. There's no silver bullet to affordability. There's no silver bullet to property equality. It's just not going to happen in the way in which people do. So here is another instrument. It's another tool by which the Liberals have said, okay, the biggest barrier, the research tells us the biggest barrier to home ownership is saving for a deposit. You need to be able to save for a deposit for the banks to see you as, adequate risk in terms of lending you the money. They want to make sure that they don't lose out in lending you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we've got this scheme where it says up to 40% of super to a maximum of $50,000 can be used temporarily in terms of, and that's an important point. It's a key point in terms of buying both existing and new property. And here's the important point: at the end of the time of you sell the property, you'll repay that back into super, and a portion, I should say, of that capital gain is also going to go back into boosting up your super. Now, the policy will start from 1 July 2023 in terms of, what they're looking as a start date. Now, in terms of, there's no caps on incomes or property caps, right? So now, bearing in mind, you can only use 40% of your super, so it's not taking out the vast majority of your super, and it's temporarily. So this, for me, sort of speaks to even people who are in their 40s, who may have thought that they've missed out on potentially getting into the property market. This could be their last chance. And we know through all of the research and reports in terms of, people's adequate levels of retirement, a property is absolutely critical. It's enormous. So from that point of view, that's what we're looking at. So,
hey Ben, can we just do a little reminder to our community that superannuation is actually intended to be a tax vehicle. It's actually superannuation. When you invest in super, you're not investing in a company or a property, or you're actually just putting money into a vehicle that has considerable tax concessions that were designed to help you fund the future. Because you and I were talking about this yesterday. They decided back in the Keating government that there wasn't going to be enough for everyone, because in prior generations, you'd finish work, you might last a couple of years after that.
I've got some stats for you, Bryce, that I looked up overnight, right? So,
okay, so before I come to that, the point is it is a vehicle, folks. So
yes,
in this whole conversation, we want that context to be remembered, because that vehicle will then invest in something. Can be cash, you can hold it as cash if you want, but it will have some form of return as the goal, that will not only have a pool of capital that you have saved, it's your money that you've saved over time, but hopefully there's some performance on that accrued pool of capital over time. So in some of the questions, and you'll see this a bit later on that we've got from some of our people who've asked the questions, that basic fact needs to be forefront of mind, because if you're investing in big stocks or a bank or through your super, or this is effectively saying you can invest in a property and get the performance of a property. So I think that's really important to remember. But your stats, Ben.
Yeah, so effectively the backstory is this. Treasury in 1990 to 1992 was starting to run the stats on life expectancy in Australia. So in 1930, because this is important, 1930, the average life expectancy was 63 years of age, right? So you fast track from 1930, all of those post-war people, and the people who lived through the recession and the depression, they were all going to live. Their life expectancy was 63 years. So that basically brings you up into the 1990s, the early 1990s. Now, here they are in the early 1990s saying the people who are being born today, in 1992, life expectancy had gone up to 74 years. Now, life expectancy for those people who are being born today is close to 100 years of age. So obviously, technology, medical advancement, it's amazing, right? We have been very fortunate. Thank you to the baby boomers who have made us live longer. So with that story, here's our problem. When you turn 55 back in that day, you would get a pension. Now, it's pretty easy to pay a pension for someone who's going to live for maybe 5 to 7 years in terms of paying out that pension. But Treasury were forecasting the government was going to go broke in terms of not having enough money to pay a pension for everyone. So here's the internal conversation that was being had was, all right, well, we need to start a savings scheme. Yeah, no, that's fine. But, history tells us that we're
not good savers.
We're not good. I mean, we've been banging on about this, people, from episode number 1, people being done with money. We as a nation holistically are very poor at managing money. Even though when we ask ourselves how good we are, we actually give ourselves an A.
We're smashing it.
Or a B-, but we're terrible at it, holistically speaking. There's only about 5 to 10% who do it really well. So the point being is, okay, well, what do we do? So the concept was forced savings. So super is a forced saving scheme that was forced payments coming from employees into a bucket, and that would then be managed by professional financial services managers in their superannuation funds. And ultimately, when you turn 50, at the time, when you turn 60, now 65, and then they'll eventually move it to 67. And then, because even then they're still saying, they're panicking, like, because once that super runs out, if you're going to live for 30 or plus years in retirement, so we need to set the expectation, and we've been saying this on the podcast for a long time, is that if you think that if you're in your early 20s now and you think that 65 will be the age of retirement, generally speaking, you're kidding yourselves, right? What's going to be happening is that will probably move to 70 or 75 over the 20 or 30 years or 40 years of your working life, because the government will not be able to fund more people. Now, this is why property is so essential in terms of as a wealth creation vehicle, even your principal home. The fact that it appreciates in value is absolutely fundamental to future choice. And the other part of the policy, which we'll talk about later, is where you can, basically put money sell down your principal home and put money into super that then tops up that savings amount or that nest egg that you've got to get you through retirement. So there is huge, huge short-term and long-term economic benefits from a prosperous property market in this country. And yet the debate and the narrative continues to keep turning towards affordability and the challenges of getting in the market. Now, make no mistake, I want to recognize those people. It is hard to save for a deposit. So this is just another tool. But what you do not want to do, you do not want to see a property market, when around 55 to 60% of households' wealth, and the reason why Australia per capita is in the top, well, depending on which survey you look at, top 1, top 5 in terms of wealth nations and personal wealth, it's all on the back of a very strong property market. And that underpins economic activity. For every dollar that goes in, there's multiple dollars produced, $6 to $10 for every dollar that's invested in property. So there is fundamental reasons why the property market is the bare nucleus of consumer activity and financial and economic prosperity in this country. So what can we do to help people get in? This is a good example of another instrument to use.
Well, it's a case in point that the government of the day will never let the market go back. Well, I'll rephrase that. They will do everything that they can to make sure that the market doesn't go backwards, right? So the next, both sides of politics have both given out ways for you to underpin on the demand side, because they're both giving demand side scenarios here to underpin. So for those people thinking that you need the property market to go down in order to be able to buy in, that is a work of fiction. That is something that will not happen, given the fact that there are, I think the number's over 11 million people who own real estate in this country.
Too big to fail, Bryce. It's simply too big to fail. And if it did, let's say...
protected at the ballot box.
Let's say, so politically, it's a nightmare. Economically, it's Armageddon if we do see significant corrections in the property market. And here's the irony, Bryce. Those people who are sitting back saying, finally, property prices, if hypothetically, because it's still plausible, it's a very small chance of it happening.
Contagion.
But let's say it does go back 50%. Well, you'll have 15% unemployment. You'll have probably youth unemployment running at 20 to 25%. So all of those people...
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah, finally, property prices are cheap. We won't have a job. So you won't be able to borrow money anyway, because, the banks will only be lending money. I mean, we are talking about a depression, not a recession, but a depression over a period of time. So the governments and the instruments that governments use in terms of household wealth effect, household consumption, it all is in the fundamentals of property. And so that's why, the governments are not going to crash the economy to try and let people get into the property market. What they're going to do is introduce instruments like this. They absolutely need to do more on the supply side. We talked about that. We're an island. We've got plenty of land. So if you can reduce the red tape, and the other big thing that I've talked about many a time is the cost of building a home is 40+% of that is in taxes and charges at the state and local government levels. You want to improve building costs and the cost to actually build a home, that's what you go after. You go after all of the stamp duties, the developers, tariffs, the subdivision tariff, all of that stuff, because it's ultimately falls into what we pay when we buy a home. So, I think we've said enough about the affordability story. Let's keep moving through the policy.
So let's quickly wrap that, Ben. So it's available. Yep. So the super home buyer scheme is for first home buyers up to 40% up of their super up to a maximum of 50, applies to both new and existing. And the reason we went through that historical record of super, Ben, is because the invested amount to be returned upon sale is an important part for people to remember. It's not like you're pulling money out of super and therefore to the detriment of your investment. You're just choosing to allocate that portion of the investment available within your super into the form of residential real estate, which has...
Because we're on record as saying it's not a good idea if it was just to rip money out of super and buy property. That is...
The important part is it's coming back, and it's coming back with
interest.
Some pepper. So starts on the 1st of July 2023. You talked about there's no income or price caps. You have to need to have saved 5% separately. So that's that one. The other one that you hinted at there, Ben, is the Older Australians Downsizing Policy, which Labor has proposed to match. Has two key planks. The first one is the extension of the existing tax break, allowing up to $300,000 from the sale of a family home to be placed in super without penalty. So what that means is you can put that in without having any as an after-tax contribution equivalent, and two people can do that. So one spouse can do it, the other spouse can do it. So that's up 300. So the extension of that break without penalty, and the second one is the exempting the proceeds of sale from the assets test for 2 years instead of 1. So this actually does potentially help on the supply side, because if you've got some deterrents from people downsizing, which would free up larger homes, because what we do know is rental accommodation is efficiently used, but owner-occupier accommodation isn't necessarily efficiently used for that reason, because of the transaction costs and getting in and out. So if you can encourage people to downsize, move to something more neat, and then open up more flow, that could be a self-fulfilling prophecy that can unlock more stock available in the market. It was at 65, moved to 60 years of age from 1st of July. But if they're re-elected, they will change that age limit to 55. Why I think that's important, Ben, is because you may, because the argument is that it's been a pretty low take-up because it's been around since the 2017-2018 budget. One is probably because of awareness, but two is if you are moving that from 65 to 55, people may make some different decisions at 55, because there's a whole bunch of life stage that they're about to move into where that might make sense. They downsize, they move to another property, they've got more money to top up their super, which has all these tax concessional environments, because remember, it's a tax vehicle. It's planning for your future. So this one could be good on the supply side, Ben.
It is a good policy, Bryce. It is a considered policy around exactly what you said. Bringing it down to 55 makes a lot of sense to me, because at 55 you are landing the plane. You're still usually in accumulation phase. So this amount that you can put into this vehicle, because when you do currently under the laws, when you do move into pension phase, based on how the year that you were born and the age of when pension phase is, you're entitled to access, it's tax-free, right? So this is like a golden handshake that you'll be getting. It's like retiring twice, where you get a golden handshake the second time. Huge lump sums of money go into this. And to all of those people who are considering it, please talk to a financial advisor, because there is no better vehicle to have money in retirement than your super. I cannot stress that enough. Even though you've got, mandatory, sort of sell downs or allocations that you have to spend, this is the whole idea, right? It's a perfect win-win, because you've got a nice big, sort of, as I said, golden handshake goes into retirement. You can then start to continually get that money compounding and giving you a return. You've downsized into your, retirement village or sort of lifestyle village or something like that, or you've moved regionally. It's a no-brainer. I would hate to think that people are parking that money inside, term deposits and paying interest and tax on. It's just a really, really simple thing. So bringing it down just means it opens up the pool of people who might undertake this policy, and that means opening up supply. So it takes out the old family homes, or introduces more supply of existing family homes where new families can come into those areas as older people start to think about their retirement and moving on. And I put myself in that older people category as someone who's turning 51 this year. But that is so good balance in those two particular policies.
There you go. So a couple of other ones from Liberal is the regional home guarantee. So that's incentivising the purchase or construction of homes in regional areas. So 10,000 low deposit guarantee. So that's 5%. It also applies to non-first home buyers. The other one is an expanded single parent family opportunity. So increased low deposit guarantees for single parent families. There'll be 5,000 opportunities with a 2% deposit. So a couple of other demands.
Really sensible policy. So again, just other instruments, other options, other tools. You're not crashing the property market. You're basically trying to address to get people into, again, regional areas or single parent family house. They are the biggest, most challenged people in terms of trying to run a family on a single income, and trying to get into the property market is very, very difficult. So again, just another opportunity, 5,000, 2% deposit, and then the government sort of, guarantees the rest for the lender. So these are, again, sensible ideas, not silver bullet solutions. There's no such thing. Anyone who studies this will tell you that, there's multiple things that need to happen in this space, but those two things are also helpful.
The thing too is increase the home guarantee price caps, Ben. So borrowers will still need to meet the usual loan repayments and assessments from the lender, but the income caps continue at 125 for individuals and 200 for couples.
Yep.
But on average, it's about $100,000 increase from the capital city regional centre. So like New South Wales went from 8 to 900, Vic 7 to 800, so all the way through about 100,000 increase. ACT went from 500 to 750. Otherwise, the rest are all 100,000. And then the difference between the rest of states. So, for example, New South Wales 800,000, rest of states 600,000. So you've got to obviously see where you qualify based on where you live. Yep. But there's an increase in house price cap spend, which is an acknowledgement that prices have moved, which is obvious to all.
Yeah, so it's indexation sort of playing its role in terms of recognising that, but still sort of saying that, hey, we're going to give you these opportunities where you don't have to pay LMI, you don't have to have more than a 5% deposit. All of these types of things are about breaking the barrier of having to save for a deposit to get into a home, because it is the biggest barrier. So again, good ideas. Never perfect. Won't satisfy everyone, but certainly good ideas.
Yeah, and I think the important point you've said a couple of times now, the instruments for people to get over that hurdle for the deposit. A couple of existing policies. So we just talked about that new home guarantee that still exists. If Liberals elected, they will over triple that from 10,000 currently to 35,000. And the first home super saver scheme will still exist. So that's covering the policies for the Liberal Party, Ben. Labor, yes. Shared equity scheme, the help to buy from the Labor Party. So let's talk a bit about that.
This is, again, excellent policy, Bryce. Mm-hmm. You don't have to look far in terms of Western Australia's had this policy for a long time. Victoria's had, a policy introduced reasonably. This is, again, about addressing the opportunity for people on low incomes to be able to get into the market. So yes, it is stimulatory. Yes, it will increase demand. All of these types of things do bring forward demand. So there will be, an initial spike or bump, but then ultimately it'll then be baked in, and then that demand story will continue on as people go through. So 10,000 houses a year. 30% for existing property, so they're trying to allocate it for existing property, and 40% for new property. So Labor's trying to stimulate economic activity. Like all of these things, they can be inflationary with inflation at the current level, because it potentially does increase demand. But let's think bigger picture. Inflation will get under control. So again, I'm really, really positive for this particular policy. Option to purchase more share in the property over time. So as you hold that property, the government takes 40% interest in that property. You can effectively buy them out in 5% increments. Now, obviously this policy here does cost the government. They will have to borrow to put their component of equity into the property. So that's why there's a cost to this type of policy. In terms of the super policy, there's not really a cost other than administration. But Labor is going to have to borrow money, and that is going to be charged interest in terms of pulling this policy together. But in terms of how you qualify, so for individuals on less than $90,000 a year, and for couples on $120,000. So again, it's 10,000 places. You need to live in the property for 2 years. I really encourage this type of policy to try and help those who don't have the opportunity to get a larger deposit at any point in time. And again, I think it's really, really good policy.
Again, allows people to, because we've got to remember here that the number one reason that people generally want to buy the home is for shelter, for for an essential need. So even if there is some inflationary pressure on pricing, it means that people get a home, and B, it's 10,000 households a year in very specific price bands. So it's not for everyone anyway. So it's not like it's a blanket approach where anyone in any suburb at any cost can buy it. There's segmented parts of the market that you can. So, for example, eligible region, New South Wales, the capital city region centre, price cap's $950. New South Wales, the rest of the state, $600. Victoria, $850, where the rest of the state, capital city and regional, $850, and the rest of the state, $550. So it's not a blanket across every market in every suburb having an inflationary impact. It will have it in those particular price bands. But again, we've got to remember that the core need is for shelter. It's for people to create lifestyle and memories and safety and security for their family.
I think you make a really good point there, Bryce, and the numbers support that, right? So first home buyers, because obviously most of this stuff is relating to first home buyers. In some cases, though, you can be a secondary buyer if you've had a relationship breakdown or something along those lines. But if we look at the numbers, like last year we had 560,000 property transactions, and in terms of, the first home buyers, we saw around 15 to 16,000 first home buyer loan commitments. That's how we measure first home buyers getting into the market. So, let's say, obviously it was a very busy year. The property market was quite buoyant last year. So let's say that drops to, say, 500,000 transactions this year. First home buyers are really only representing around sort of that 15 to 20,000. Now, remember, some of these packages are about, 10,000 for this help to buy scheme. And so we are hoping that this will mean more ownership, and we will see the trend of percentages of people who own versus rent start to shift and come back towards that 70-30, because it has been sort of moving down a little bit. So, and the census data that will be released in the coming months will give us some indication of just how that is playing out. But so for me, it's like, okay, context people, is it going to move the market as much as people think it is? Well, not really. One, it's spread out across the nation. And two, there's not that many of these people that can access those funds. And as has been widely documented, if we come back to the super, using your super, a lot of people, so let's say the average person who's 30 years of age, ATO tells us that they've got around $51,000 in their super. So remember, if they wanted to put 20, they could only take 40% of that. So that's around 20,000. So that's only 20,000 that can also be contributed to your deposit. And if you're a couple, that would mean 40,000, right? So let's sort of, again, not think, oh my God, here we go. There's going to be literally tens of thousands of new buyers coming into the market. We transact around 500,000 properties a year. This is only going to be a very small percentage of that. So I'm not really sure it's going to give, that bump, that a large bump. But what it might do is it might stabilize the market or reinforce, a softer landing on the property market in terms of prices.
See what's going through people's minds, though, isn't it, Ben? Like there's this carrot to get in. 30% help. You reduces the mortgage that you're paying. It means that you can get in maybe a better property than you could have ordinarily done on your own. Bring the forward, and then that pain, Ben, when you do sell it, you got to give the portion back to the government. Not only not only the portion that you make, but the portion of the capital growth that'll burn for a few. So they can't lose sight of the bigger picture of
if you're paying money, and remember, it's your money. You're just putting it back into investing, and that is not a bad thing, right? Like, this is my point. The government isn't using, in the super, it's your money. They're not using any of their own money. So, from a cost point of view, it's not a burden like that, the Help to Buy. But again, I'm very happy to help those people in greater need who have inequality to be able to get a leg up into the property market. Because if we can get more people into property, everything is very good. And you think, wait a minute, but you're into investing. That means you'll have less renters. Yes, we would. And that's not a bad thing. I'm putting that on record. That's exactly what we want. We want to have a sustainable market over the longer term. And, not everyone needs to be an investor in property. And
the Labor Party is also, if they were elected, they would keep the new home guarantee policy in place.
Which is great. So that's that 5%, remember, where you only need to say 5%, and then they'll waive the LMI and back you in on that. So, and that's potentially, 35,000 places. So that's a good story.
And also the regional first home buyer support scheme. So there's some mirroring of existing policies that they would continue if elected. So really, the two headline acts here are, do you want to use your super to get access, or do you want to get into bed with the government? Both instruments to enable more people to buy on the demand side. Equally, the Liberal Party is proposing something that may shift the dial on supply as well, Ben. So we did put it out to the socials and see what the feedback was. So let's have a little run through on some of the questions that we received on this, Ben. So this one's from James Watson. Am I missing something? I generally can't see the benefit of the super housing policy. If you have a 5% deposit, if you qualify for and can service a loan, you will be far better off paying mortgage insurance than gutting your superannuation. Further, if you have the 5% deposit and you have the full $125,000 in your super and you borrow the maximum $50,000 and you're looking to buy something at around $650,000 to $700,000, i.e. you're not in the capital city, you will still have to pay LMI. So what is the point of this? Seems it will simply drive house prices up.
Yeah, so I think this has been, in looking at some of the social commentary that's gone around the place, it's a common question in terms of how do I benefit from this? And I think James has got some really good points about, all right, well, do I still have to pay LMI? So what I thought I would do, Bryce, is I said, all right, I'm going to do a very simple example. And that simple example will just hopefully articulate to people the fundamentals of investing and the fundamentals of why it may be a plausible idea. And now it's not for everyone. And remember, these are back of envelope calculations. There are a lot of nuances that go on in here, but I want to try and, explain to people exactly how this would play out, because is it worth it? So the example that I'm going to use is that if I have access to my super and I'm going to take $30,000 out of that super, and as opposed to leaving that $30,000 in super. Now, I want you to think about it like this. That money in super, there's an investment team that are deciding where they're putting that money. In this particular case, you become that person in deciding to where to put that money, right? So, because if you're going to put it into your own home, because it's only for first home buyers, that's the opportunity cost that you've got here. So you've got $30,000. Now, in the example that I'm using, I'm saying that super is going to return a 6.5% gain inside that 12-month period. And so ultimately, my $30,000 is going to increase by $1,950 because I get my 6.5% return in that 12-month period. The difference with property is that ultimately that $30,000 is going to, in some cases, allow you to actually get into the property market. Now, if it does do that, this is the point about cash on cash returns. $30,000 in the example that I'm using may allow you to control a $500,000 property. Now, if you control that $500,000 property and you're only getting a 6%, so less than super, you get a 6% return. Well, you're obviously getting 6% on $500,000. So in theory, that's an increase, a paper increase of $31,800. So your cash on cash return is 106% versus 6.5%. Now, for those who are following along, let's understand that, well, actually, you've got to borrow money here. So let's throw that into the equation, and I'll come and argue the point that you shouldn't have to throw debt into the equation, but let's say we do. So let's say we're buying that $500,000 property. There are stamp duty costs and other costs. So I've rounded them up to 5%. So effectively your 5% savings that you need to have as part of this policy, don't care about the political party, but I care about the policy in terms of, so that neutralizes itself. So I bring $25,000 in my 5% savings and deposit, and that's going to cover my stamp duty and costs of getting into the property. Yep. So ultimately, I've got to then bring the $30,000 in from super, which means that I'm going to get a loan of $470,000. Now, where James is talking about, I still have to pay LMI. Correct, James? That would still potentially indicate that there's a loan to value ratio of 94%. So I then added $15,000 for mortgage insurance. Okay. Now, remembering that you may also be able to get the mortgage insurance exemption as well. Nowhere in the policy stuff have we seen that if you choose one, you can't choose any of the other policies. So you might also be able to get some of the other exemptions. So have a look around, people, be creative. If the government's offering you opportunity, take advantage of it. So in that particular case, I've now got a $485,000 loan. So if I've got a $485,000 loan and I've put a 4.5% interest rate on that $485,000 loan. So even though my paper return is $31,800, I then pay interest on that loan. So I'm not talking about principal, I'm just talking about interest. That interest is going to cost me $22,500. So my on paper, very generalistic return here. I'm not trying to, sort of say that, there aren't nuances in this. There are. Well, that's $9,300. So compare the pair. Let's use the industry super. Compare the pair. Yep. The same $30,000 has been allocated to an investment purpose. One investment purpose controls a $500,000 asset. The other one doesn't control anything more because it's sitting in super. So you got $1,950 in return at a 6.5% return versus a 6% return on a $500,000 property is $9,300. Or a 31% cash on cash return, right? So I just want to let that land in terms of, the multiplication effect of what's going on here. Now, that is effectively saying when people say, oh, I'm going to be worse off in my super. You are not necessarily going to be worse off in your super. And I understand timing the market and, that is a straight line performance or a flat performance. So let's think about, what is being prosecuted by the government saying that this is good policy is the idea of having access to your super brings your purchase forward, doesn't it, Bryce? So you want to, yeah. So
and it speaks to the point that in the question too, Ben, about gutting your super. That was part of the. So what you've beautifully illustrated there was, and admittedly hard to catch on audio, right? Because there's a lot of numbers. Yes. But what you're saying is, you're actually pulling the money out and using the money to control a larger asset. Whereas if you had left it untouched, it would be not controlling that larger asset. So you've just demonstrated via numbers that by controlling the larger asset at a lower return, yields you a higher dollar return. Yes. And that higher dollar return on the initial money, the initial 30,000, represents a much higher percentage. To your point, 31%. Versus 6.5. And then if you take out the debt, it's 166.5. You're going to talk to that point shortly, but to your other point, if it helps you buy a property in 2023, instead of a property in 2025, the same $500,000 property. Now I understand that prices will move, but just stay here with the maths. If you were to do it 2 years earlier, after 30 years, the value of the property, if you bought it in 2023, is $2.8 million. If you wait another couple of years, after 28 years, because you're 2 years less, it's worth 2.55. So the difference is $315,000. The difference from waiting to your overall nest egg, if you remember what Evan said before, the whole elephant, not just one little bit of the elephant, it's got to be the whole elephant. So the bigger picture here of what you're doing is the value of your asset base here would be an additional $315,000, to be exact, $315,902, an extra 12%, just because you were able to shift the time horizon forward by 2 years with no other variable changing. The same purchase price.
Very generic. It's a very past performance is no guarantee. But it's basically saying comparing apples for apples, starting 2 years earlier versus 2 years later, $315,000 difference. So what they're saying is, you keep your money in your super, your money's not working as hard for you, and you've got to still put it back in there, which we both really like. But if you do temporarily borrow it, you get a lower loan size and you're in the game and you're in the market. And then ultimately is what we're talking about. That's going to give you future choices. And over time, this is the one real asset that we have in every household in Australia that does deliver us capital gains. It is an appreciating asset on the back of the loans. And it's in recognition of a strong economy, strong prosperity. And that then gives you those future choices to be able to, downsize later, or in this particular case, you might be starting your journey on the property ladder. And so this is your first foot in the door. So coming back to James's question, where can you buy, for that sort of price point in a capital city? Well, you might start with a unit, a 2-bedroom unit in an old flat, sort of style that we've talked about to get you into the market. You might go to the reaches of the edges of town to get in. But, population is going to be a thing in Australia because it's such a rich country to be, you win the lottery by getting here. So migration will continue to keep going. So thinking about that medium to longer term. And what I like about our very simplistic model there, Bryce, that you just went through, is this whole idea about, but what if property prices are going to go down and whatever, I'll time the market better. You won't know if you're right or wrong. The government of the day could introduce a stimulus package tomorrow that pops property prices and all of it. So you take the guesswork out. There's no judgment. You've got the money to go. You've now got a deposit. You've got an opportunity to get in. You still got to service the loan, because this is the other thing people also go, this is being missed by many people in terms of, it means anyone can pay any price for a property. No. Serviceability, borrowing power is capped by income. So, there's no way in which it's going to, put a what was some of the comments? It's like, adding kerosene to a bushfire. No, it's not. It's not even close to that, right? Because people's ability to afford a property will ultimately decide where the property prices end up in that location. So, so I think from that point of view, that just sort of answers James' question is, what's the upside? It's cash on cash return in terms of controlling a bigger asset. And I've even put in the LMI payment, and it still speaks volumes in terms of your overall return.
And you're in the game. This one's from Mark Hooper. Would the LNP be better using super as collateral against the loan rather than taking it out? Super should be for retirement. I feel taking super money out prematurely is bad policy. Are they trying to give us all higher interest rates? These policies will increase housing prices, feeding inflation, and give RBA the need to raise rates. Do you feel that will lead to higher inflation and maybe rates? Love the ALP policy as is, but feel it will feed into inflation, so ill-timed. That was one of the recommendations, to use it as collateral, Ben. But at this point, I hope that we've made the point here that super should be for retirement. We agree, and the backstory on why that is. And hopefully we've reminded folks about the part of the policy that says you've got to put it back, and you've got to, so it's for you to get a return on it now and serve the dual purpose of the shelter. But yes, super should be for retirement. So hopefully that helps that. But Ben, to the point around interest rates, interesting.
Yeah, well, is it inflationary? Is it ill-timed? I think Mark's got a point there, but all policies, everything we've been talking about is demand-driven side, right? Except for the sell down into and adding to super. That is a supply side story there. and that adds for mobility and making property a little bit more liquid there. So yes, it is, but I think, as I said, I think inflation is something that we will see pass, and we've got to think medium to longer term about this. This is not when you're buying property, it's not a short term 12-month, 15-month thing. You're talking about 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I mean, the average person stays in their home around these days, I think 8 or 9 years before they move on. So, and plenty of stay forever, right? And it's only those people who are transitory that are moving every 2 or 3 years that brings that average down to 7 to 10. So from my point of view, anything that increases the ability to get into the market earlier than saving a 20% deposit is demand and puts some demand pressure. But I think this is evenly spread, and I don't think it's a big enough demand pool for first home buyers that are going to move markets materially. In terms of the timing, if this was to be another home builder type spike in new construction, then naturally that will put greater demand on raw materials and input materials in building homes. And that could be inflationary, which naturally then would say that the interest rates by the RBA would need to continually keep tweaking that to get on top of that before it starts to stabilise over the medium term.
Here's a question, or it's a comment from Sven Peterson. I reckon the LNP may have just lost the election with this dumb idea. Let's fix the housing supply problem by increasing demand. 3 question marks. WTF? I think hopefully we've prosecuted a case that it's not going to do demand on an increasing scale, on a mass scale, but also they are implementing a policy for increasing supply as well. But,
and I mean, I'm definitely of the view now that, again, whoever wins the elections, most policy out there at the moment is pretty much centralist, So I think from that point of view, you're not going to have much of a change. You're going to have Labor spending a bit more. That's what they do, but in theory, most of them are sort of centralist policy stuff. So, that the moderate sort of activity. So you keep building an economy, everything goes all right. To come back to that point, what I'm pleased about this is it's put the debate out there about how you can potentially introduce certain types of instruments that may feed into helping people get into the property market. So I'm not thinking that even if, the Liberals don't get in this time that we still have this debate. We still have conversations around this as an idea because it's just another tool, another instrument.
For some balance, Maddie Tipowicz, I hope I got that right. I think both policies are very poor ideas, especially Labor's. Who the hell would want the government owning 40% of their property, Ben?
Well, I think for Maddie, for those people, what's your trade-off? I mean, at the end of the day, if that's the only way you're going to be able to own property in Australia, it's actually not a bad idea. So I think Labor has it right to help those who need the most help to be able to get into the property market.
Michael Insky says, I'm a 33-year-old professional. My super sits at about 40K today. I don't know if anyone else is in the same boat as me, but doesn't seem like it'll get me anywhere. Question, who will benefit from accessing super average age professions? It clearly benefits those who are on higher incomes, Ben, because by nature, they would be contributing more to super. By nature, they would have more in their super fund, and therefore they would have access to more. So it is definitely a policy that is an advantage to people on higher incomes, which speaks
as is wealth creation generally. Yep. Like I'm in a capitalist society and a society that's an open free marketplace. The reality is, yes, higher incomes do allow people to spend more, to invest more, and to make more. That's the nature of how an economy like a open market economy works.
So it's from Emma. What's to stop someone selling the property, blowing all the cash, and then needing the age pension?
Yes.
Will they put stops in place that force funds to go back into super, or has this been overlooked?
Well, it's not overlooked, Emma. I mean, look, there are ad hoc cases from time to time of people even setting up self-managed super funds and then just accessing the cash and burning it all, right? I mean, they are people who are breaking the rules, which means they're breaking the law, which means that, they are in for a world of pain.
There are enormous penalties for tax evasion. So
yes. So Yeah, Emma, like if someone is going to sell the property and think that they can, sort of keep that out of the prying eyes of the regulators and so forth, I'm pretty sure in this digital age, especially with digital tracking of money and digital matching and data matching services that all the different governments now use, they'll be hard pressed to sort of break the system. But if they do, they'll suffer the wrath and the consequences of their decision through the courts and also in the fines that they pay. And I can then pretty much guarantee them that they will be on the pension, and they might also be on $2.60 an hour in jail for a little while there as well.
Yeah. Like you reap what you sow. So
Yes.
That's important. Keely Gee, access to Super One. Will this be within the current SMSF route? Shared equity. Can people buy out the government share of their property? At what point the agreement ends? Death, forced sale, or refinance in a certain time frame?
So there's a bit going on here.
Yeah.
But we'll start with, access to super. So, yes, inside self-managed super funds, you obviously, you're the trustee, you're in control of the investment strategy in that. Now, the ASIC and the regulators have always been really clear about the appropriate size balance that you would need to set up a self-managed super fund, and that's usually $200,000 and beyond. So anyone who's thinking of setting up a self-managed super fund with $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000,
it's cost prohibitive.
It's just not worth it, people, unless you're an absolute genius investor and you think you can do amazing things. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I would never be advocating for people to be setting up super with such small balances. So ultimately, you'll be taking it out of your retail or industry fund, and that will be tracked and managed by the appropriate administration of that fund on your behalf. And that's why they charge you fees to do that.
In terms of the shared equity, can people buy out the government share of their property? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
In fact,
in those 5% increments.
A yearly assessment on, so to see if your income is increased. If it's increased past a certain threshold, you actually have to start paying it back. But as you just mentioned there, Ben, it's in 5% increments. So if they own 40%, you can take another 5% back, but you can't do it at 4 or 3%, for example. So you can do 5 or 10. And also, Ben, in the fine print, don't quote me on it, if there's an increase in the value, there's an opportunity for you to go back to the bank and revalue against that as well, so that you can start to take more of the government share as well. But the idea is the government wants to recycle the money and give it to someone else an opportunity. So once you stand alone, that you can. So they want you to have that ownership as quickly as possible. So can people buy out the government share of the property? Yes, they can.
Yes.
What is the cost to the taxpayer to fund these programs? Is one cheaper than the other? Someone has to repay the cost. Of wondering which more taxpayer friendly. The more taxpayer friendly is definitely the super one, Ben, because it's not using any of the government money. The shared equities is they have to go and borrow the money to be able to provide the extra amount, and the borrowings would be a cost on the public. So therefore, your taxes would be paying for that. But
there's an administrative burden on both. But the difference between the help to buy policy for shared equity is there's an interest cost on the loan. So that's our money. Government's borrowing money to be able to do that. So there will be a cost, but the hope is that cost is covered by the capital growth over time and the repayment of that, plus any gains that they've made. So it can make the policy evergreen. Which is a good idea.
That's a good way to put it for the evergreen. So thank you, Lisa. Last one here from Graham. With shared equity, do you have to pay out their percentage on sale? Once again, it would leave them short to make the next step on their journey. So yes, you do have to pay out their percentage. But if you're holding it for some time and you've got into the market, the hardest rung is the first step on the ladder.
Yeah.
So to your second point, it would leave them short to make the next step on their journey. No, not always. In a lot of cases, if you've, as Ben said, you've been holding it for some time, the amount of equity that you've accumulated means that you then have the next step on the ladder. So yes, giving portion of theirs back, but your portion hopefully is enough for you to move on from retiring out the debt through principal and interest repayments over time. So increasing equity through asset minus liability, increasing your equity, obviously some growth over time. So a combination of those two. Because you don't have to give the government back the portion of the equity that you've created through reducing your loan. That's yours.
No, that's right. So your focus when you're in is pay down the debt as quick as you possibly can. Hope that the property's going up in value quite healthily, without being crazy nosebleed growth. That's what you want. And then let's say you do sell the property. All of a sudden, you'll do the math before you sell, of course. But what if that then meant that the next property, the upgraded property that you're going to on the property ladder, means that you can get an 80% lend against that? So you pay the proceeds back and you get an 80% loan. And so all of a sudden you've avoided mortgage insurance. You got into the market earlier, which meant you didn't have to save for a deposit as property prices kept growing out of your reach. Because this is what we've said for first home buyers from day one, that if values are growing quicker than you can save, then you need to be seriously considering about getting into the market. If values are growing slower than the markets that you're looking at are growing, then keep saving. Right? Keep saving. We can't be any simpler or clearer about those two messages.
And lift your eyes is probably the one on that one, because you are living in a house that you practically cannot afford without the help. So you're living in a better house by definition. And to Ben's point there, but your contribution is lower. So that means the weekly repayment is lower. So that means that you can focus all of your debt of putting all your money on an offset account, Ben, so that you can...
And by being able to get in, you're taking the guesswork out of picking the market.
Yes.
Don't think short term. Don't think you're a genius in terms of picking the bottom and all that. No one ever knows the bottom until it's the bottom. I mean, you only need to be listening to equity podcasts and shit. Like they're all, oh, maybe it's the bottom. No one ever knows until we come out the other side of it. So, this is a way of basically saying, I'm in a financial position to do that. I've done my budget, my home budget. I'm going to then think about this as a medium to long-term decision over the next 5 to 10 years, and my income's secure. I'm feeling good about it. And now that I've got this extra top up, I can potentially get in, or I can take advantage of X government policy or X proposed policy. That's it. And then get going. Right? And then whatever you do, build money up in your offset, and then just go hard. As hard as you can, do whatever you can. Also, we've also said, if you buy a house that needs a bit of TLC, put your weekend little, effort into it, a bit of elbow grease, get it, beautify it. All of those things are going to add to its revaluation that Bryce was talking about. And that will get you on your journey in the property market and being, the great Australian dream, home ownership. We want everyone to experience the great Australian dream of home ownership.
Yeah. So, all right, there you go. Thanks for your questions, folks. Hopefully that's helped you digest. If you're listening to this prior to the election, hopefully it helps you become more informed. If you are listening to this after the election, some reflection points to see what happened on the time. But the key takeaways, Ben, is clearly the property is protected at the ballot box, as these policies highlight its importance in the landscape. Second point is it's for those people that are waiting around for property prices to come down to make things more affordable. Hopefully we've helped you recorrect that by thinking, well, no, you need to use the instruments available to you so that you can get in as soon as you practically can, because historically governments have protected the property market. So you could be waiting around for a little while. And another takeaway here is super can benefit from property performance here, Ben. It's not actually robbing Peter here. Or you're not crashing your super balance to the detriment of its performance, because all you're doing is reallocating. And if you look at it through that lens, you're putting super, rather than putting it into stocks and shares, you're putting it into property, and its performance will ultimately be determined by the property selection that you do, the same as the assets you'd select within the vehicle. The money is going back, folks. You have to give it back. So, and you still won't be able to touch it until at some future point in time. It's your money. If it helps you get on the ladder, that's good. What are your takeaways, Ben?
Oh, look, economic prosperity, jobs, growth, all of that. A strong economy does provide for its people primarily, and it also gives enough money for a safety net for others, right? So you always want to make sure that you've got that. And when you do have that, that shows up in the wealth creation that occurs in your assets, including your own home and those types of things. So they're always important. So I would say I'm passionate about people being able to get into property. The reason why we started our business, Bryce, was that it's built on an underlying passion that every Australian has an opportunity to achieve financial well-being. Everyone. And it's about the decisions that you make and the judgment calls that you do over that journey. And this podcast and the whole business that we run is born on that DNA that I don't care where you start from. I don't care if you've been put behind the eight ball, you've been dealt all the challenges that you were saying before, in terms of you haven't come from wealth, you haven't come from it, but you have an opportunity to learn, educate, become financially literate, and start to make those calls. Is it harder to break through that? Yes, let's acknowledge that, but it's not impossible. And for those people who make commitments to educate themselves, get a good career, and potentially start, putting money away, saving for a deposit, start investing, those type of things, you can move your family, yourself, and then ultimately into the future, your family into a comfortable financial position. And that's ultimately how we measure ourselves and the work that we do in the business that we run. And so, yeah, home ownership is an absolute must for everyone. So hopefully you'll see that. And hopefully there's more work that gets done on the supply side as well. And my final message to that is, yeah, this podcast is also about people doing dumb things with money, or leaving money on the table, or not making their money work hard enough for them. We've given you an illustration as to why today some policies might make your money work harder for you. And so think about that. And I also say to you, if you've made a comment or have an opinion on super, let me ask you this simple question around your super. Do you know if it's in growth? Do you know if it's in balanced? Do you know it's in a conservative fund? Because the best thing you can also do is make sure whoever's managing your money in super has it in the best opportunity to build wealth in that thing. So if you're sitting back here and saying it's a dumb policy and my super's for my retirement, but you haven't spent 5 minutes or 30 minutes looking at what you're invested in and what is your goal in terms of the performance of what you're getting, then really, you can't really, join in the debate, in my view, because that is just leaving money in a lazy position. So make sure that you take an active interest in that to obviously build wealth.
Well said, Ben. It goes back to my Mindset Minute conversation last week that the successful people do the basics. They're doing the basics. They're actually doing the stuff, and then they're providing some form of scale to that. But fundamentally, there is no magic dust other than doing the basics. So what you said is reinforcing that point. If the people aren't doing the basics, well, then go back to today's Mindset Minute, Ben, around the pity party.
Yeah, perfect.
Self-pity. Don't fall for the trap of self-pity. If you're actually, because I think you made a really good point, Ben, because there is definitely a correlation between education and income in this country. And the more educated you are, the higher income you have access to, the higher you have to build your wealth. So, but it is available to almost everyone. And so really make sure that you take Ben's advice there, which was very, very sage. So there you go, folks. Hopefully that's helped you digest a couple of the policies that have been announced in the lead up to this Saturday's election. My life hack
good
today,
luck, may your team win.
Are you talking about Freo there? Thank you. No problem. I appreciate that. So my life hack today, Ben, is around voting day. It's going to be busy. It's going to be done in the shadows of a pandemic, Ben. There's going to be a bunch of things that you need to do to make sure that you've washed your hands, your social distance, all those sorts of things. So it's going to be busy. So a couple of things. My one is look to vote early if you can. If you're listening to this on the Thursday or maybe even the Friday, there might be an opportunity for early voting centres. I did mine on Monday, Ben. I said this to you off air, that I took Jack to basketball on Monday, and then in the stadium they said, "Do you want to vote?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, I want to vote today." So I went in and I voted. So I didn't have to worry about that on Saturday. So that's done. But then as I was chatting to you, Ben, you've got a little hack in this. So I think we should hear this from you. What your little hack is, how you on election day.
Well, if you live in a bigger city, you're obviously in different electorates, right? Now, if you go and vote outside your electorate, there are usually two lines. There's a line for people who live in the electorate, and usually, the electoral people have got lots of seats for people to, tick their name off. But if you're out of your electorate, there's usually a smaller line.
Fast lane.
And a little fast lane. So if you, drive 10 minutes out of your electorate, and you go to a polling booth and you put your hand up and say, oh, I'm out of electorate area, then because most of those people are sitting there twiddling their thumbs all day. They're getting paid. So you're giving them some work is what I say, and potentially you can be in and out a little bit quicker. So maybe that's a little bit of a hack.
It's a great hack, and it only works if not everyone does it, because if everyone from next door's electorate comes over, the lines are exactly the same. So
maybe you can drive past your, the primary school that you vote at or where you vote and go, oh, that's a big line. And then just get on Google Maps to sort of see where your boundary line finishes in the next voting station, and just drive over there, because by the time you get over there, it might be quicker to vote than standing in your. But you've still got to have your democracy sausage, which does mean.
Wow, that's what I was going to say. You're going where the sausages are best, aren't you? Really?
Well, so you don't mind if you're having a couple of snags along the way, but here's the deal, right? We live in the greatest country on earth.
We do.
A country that we can have informed debate, we can have fiery debate for some. But ultimately, we have a political system that's stable, that has minimal corruption. There's some in there, but minimal. And so, be blessed with the fact that we have a stable democracy, because it is a fundamental essence in terms of people's livelihoods and their opportunity to live in society. So let's not lose sight of the fact that that's exactly what we have in this country. And we should never, ever, ever take that for granted, because it is an amazing place to live, because we have people that care and they go into politics to try and push their agenda forward because they're passionate about their values. Nothing wrong with that.
Good reflection point. Well said, mate. What's making property news?
Mate, what's making property news? So I obviously wanted to leave this till last. So here's the context, right? So I'm always looking for forecasts from the big banks and all of those types of people in terms of, where are we going to go with the cash rate? Because at the moment, the market is predicting that the cash rate could go over 3% really quickly, right? That means we're going to see an enormous amount of movement in the particular cash rate. Well, I always go to the source, Bryce. Yep. And in this particular case, it's normally Bill Evans, but in this particular case, it's Matt Comyn, who just happens to be the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank of Australia.
Now, he was 25% market share.
Yeah, a nice, healthy 25% market share. So you would like to think there's a couple of things I want to know from him. One is obviously about the quality of their book and any delinquencies on the mortgages, to see if there's any, we've seen it now. I saw a couple of headlines last week. Fixed rate cliff. They came. We knew they were coming. Here comes the cliff.
The cartoonists need something else to draw the cliffs for, Ben, because the physical cliff and the what was the one during pandemic time? What was the cliff there? The
the vaccine cliff, was it, or no?
No, push the rates off. So what was that? The repayment cliff. And
That's the interest rate. Yes, that's right. Repayments and people, people won't be able to pay the rents anyway. Bottom line here is Matt Comyn was interviewed by the Fin Review, and also as part of his update on their performance so far. And I took out some really important points from that. And the first one is that their forecast is for the cash rate by the end of the year to be 1.35%. And by the end of the second year to normalise out at around 1.6. So they're looking at, all of their bean counters and people in there are saying that that's where they see it land. And I'm thinking, well, these guys are at the coalface of what's going on. So they know a lot more about this stuff than I do. So I'm looking at that and sort of saying, yep, he was very clear about the markets have got ahead of themselves. And for those people who don't understand, these are the money markets, and they're, and how bonds and all of that connect to that. And a higher money market rate means actually good business for them. So there's a self-interest in predicting that. And a lot of the times over the, I've been obviously following the cash rate decision for 20 plus years, and the markets often get it wrong. Now, they did get it right about the cash rate moving earlier than what the RBA was originally forecasting, but I think they've overestimated where the cash rate's going to finish up. So we'll see who's right or wrong. In that prediction, and basically CBA and a lot of the other big banks are saying that they can't see the cash rate being anything further than sort of, the quotes have been between 1.35 and 1.75 by the end of this calendar year. So we'll see who gets it right.
welcome balancing of the narrative that's currently out there, Ben. So there you go.
Yeah, it's the hyperbole sort of fear mongering that's going on that gets oxygen these times where, because again, at the end of the day, I get it. Eyeball economy, these papers need eyeballs to sell their advertising, and that's how they all get paid. So you've got to, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's fear mongering, that's what's going to happen. But let's get to some of these, the talented experts who predict this stuff and are working in the money markets on a day-to-day basis and run, the biggest bank in the country with 25% market share. I tend to listen to those guys pretty often.
Well, they've got some weight. Their opinion carries weight. So there you go, folks. Hopefully that's helped you outline the policies on both sides of politics as we lead into Saturday's election. Thank you to everyone who contributed with your questions on socials. We appreciate you doing that. And as Ben said before, hopefully whoever you're backing gets up on Saturday. And I'm certainly hoping that whoever I'm backing this weekend gets up over whoever you're backing, Ben, by 26 points. That'll be nice.
Yeah, no, well, look, again, I'll be tipping Freo, but I'll be quietly, obviously barracking for the Mighty Pies.
Yep.
And hopefully they bring their A game on the weekend. But yes, to your point, Bryce, in terms of, political parties, they get a lot wrong. They overspend. So even if we pick the right team, they're still going to stuff it up.
On that positive note, folks, until next week, Ben.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
See you next week.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1. Because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. But folks, I want to encourage you again to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.